So we'll just start off with the first question. You've been in office for about 30 days. What have you done so far regarding migrants?
Yeah, we have a couple of key steps we've taken on migrants. One is we've created a new structure for how we're going to approach services to migrants. As you may remember, there was a proposal for a large contract to Garter World that the City Council decided not to go forward with. We're instead preparing to issue a new RFP that will be focused much more on small, local, community-based nonprofits that can provide services. So rather than having one comprehensive contract that you need a very large provider to serve, we'll have a bunch of individualized, smaller contracts that local organizations can engage in. We think that's a much better way for us to provide services and to be able to leverage the resources we already have in our communities to help serve newcomers.
Yeah, as one of the nonprofits put it to me, Garter World, it didn't go through not necessarily because it wasn't needed, but just simply because it wasn't the right vendor. How do you see smaller nonprofits fulfilling that better than a larger vendor like that?
Yeah, I think that means they are allowed to work in the area of their expertise and their experience. So if you just do food service, great. Then we can have a small part of the nonprofit that does food service. If you just want to do housing navigation, we can have a small part of the contract that does that. If you just want to do general staffing or you want to do facilities maintenance, there's a way to subdivide each of the needs so that any small business might be able to say, oh, I could take on one part of this without having to take on all of it. So I think that's going to make it much more accessible and we think much more helpful to local providers.
So would that be giving direct funding to nonprofits from city money or city funding?
Yeah, so we put out an RFP. We'll put out an RFP, I think, next week to be able to ask for applicants who want to provide those services. We'll also work on identifying the location. So I think, we will help find locations where we can have congregate shelters for people. And then that way, those outside partners don't have to manage identifying a location and providing all of the infrastructure that goes into that. It'll be a matter of just direct service provision that they can take any piece of the puzzle they want to provide.
Do you have any idea how quickly that they would receive that funding? Because I've spoken to a lot of the main nonprofits that work with migrants, and they say that they're totally out of funding, and up to date, they really haven't received any money from the city.
Yeah, so we've had a real problem with some of the federal reimbursement on these dollars. We have spent about $23 million total on the migrant crisis since December. 13 million of that has now been reimbursed by the federal government, so only about $10 million of direct city resources. But one of the things we want to do is to be able to be a better partner to be able to pay nonprofit partners more quickly. Right now it's been hard to wait on reimbursement from the federal government, so what we have to do often is go ahead and pay the bill proactively, even before we get reimbursement dollars. But we know if you're a small nonprofit, you can't cash flow 2 or 3 months while you're waiting for your bills to get paid, so we'll work on both making this RFP more accessible and making sure we get payment out to people more directly. We're working with the state to make sure they'll extend some of the navigation support they've been providing. We're optimistic with their support plus ongoing federal support, we'll be able to get local partners paid.
Obviously, you've taken an approach to homelessness, and that's one of your main priorities. Do you have any idea how many migrants are living on the streets in Denver right now?
So we know we've had about 15,000 migrants who we've served entirely since the crisis began in December. We paid for about 6,000 of those folks to have onward bus tickets to the places that were their final destinations. We have about 700 that are right now still in our shelters around the city. And so we do know many have transitioned out and have either found access to housing or opportunities. We're watching very closely to see how that influences the total homeless population. And we haven't seen huge numbers of folks that have ended up in encampments or right now expanding that population of people that are unhoused. But we are watching that closely. We think they're pretty different populations with different needs. Most of our migrants that arrive are newcomers who are looking very aggressively for work and tend to be young and able-bodied and ready to get to work. They have a different set of needs than some of our folks who might be in longer-term challenges with mental health or addiction needs that we see among our unhoused population, or people that have been chronically homeless for a long period of time, and that has a whole new set of trauma associated with it. So we do think they're different populations, although they have some similar needs around housing and access to work, but we've tried to treat them differently given those different needs.
Yeah, I know when we talked with your press secretary, we asked specifically when you came out with your homelessness plan if migrants were part of that plan, and at that time we were told that it was anyone who was living on the streets would be part of this. But then later in a press conference you said exactly that they are different populations. So what are you doing differently when you do find them to be living in tents or encampments? Because we know them to exist.
Yep. We are just doing day-by-day outreach right now to each of the encampments to get people onto by name lists where we can identify their needs and connect them to housing. I'm not aware directly of any of the initial encampments we've done outreach to that have found large populations of migrants, and so I do believe you're right that we know they are out in places trying to find access to housing. And for me, what this underscores is one of the big areas of focus we have is that I've met with Secretary Mayorkas and been talking with the federal government about two needs that we have. One is reimbursement for services, but the second is really temporary protective status so people can get access to work. I speak Spanish, so I went down to visit the migrants at the intake center before, and almost all of them, to a person, the first thing they'll say is, I just need a job. Like, I don't need support or charity. Can you help me find a job? So we know we have people here who want to work. I get calls from CEOs who say, I heard more migrants arrive. Can I hire them? So we have employers who want to hire them. What we have right now is a federal government that doesn't allow those people to go to work for those employers who want to hire them. And so we want to try to help them get access to work authorization while they're waiting for what could be a 2-year case on an asylum approval. If they're going to be here in the meantime, we want to make sure they can work in the meantime. So we're going to keep pushing for that opportunity because we know these people are ready and able and excited to get to work if we can help get them access to jobs.
Do you realistically see, obviously it's a federal issue, right, when it comes to work permits, do you see Denver being in a position where you guys can create a local work permitting program?
We're going to put everything on the table. So we're going to try creatively to see what we can do with the federal government, what we can do with the state government. I think Governor Polis has the same desire to help people get access to work. And so we're going to be creative and we'll be tenacious about trying to figure out the best path forward. But we know that absent that, we have a challenge where you have folks that are here where they're waiting up to 2 years for an asylum ruling. And if in that time they're not allowed to work, but they're expected to find housing and support themselves, the options are either the federal government has to support them or they're left trying to find access to work without authorization. And so neither of those, I think, are fair or good long-term options. So we think the best option is if we believe someone is eligible to and is waiting on an asylum case, let's let them work while they're waiting.
Are you worried at all that there will be another influx or, an increase of people arriving to Denver anytime soon?
I mean, we're monitoring still closely at somewhere around 30 people a day at this stage, and so we haven't seen huge increases at this moment. We do believe that the emergency order was a very effective strategy to really organize all of the different parts of the city to be able to provide services. We think those are stood up now and have been effective. We don't believe we need the ongoing support of the Emergency Operations Center for our migrant crisis right now, so we will not be asking the City Council to extend that emergency order. We still have all deliberate speed and urgency to take on this problem, and all of our agencies are mobilized around doing that. I have a standing weekly meeting with all the departments that are involved to make sure we're moving it forward. So no less urgency, but we think the role of the Emergency Operations Center and the Emergency Declaration has done its job on this issue, and we think we're ready to move into regular operations now to make it successful.
During the debates, you said that one of the things that you would implement would be communicating with border cities like El Paso. Yes. Have you done that? And if so, what have they told you? Yeah,
we've just started that outreach, and so some of there has been some communication previous to my arrival, and I've gotten updated and briefed on that, but we are going to expand that in the weeks to come with exactly this lesson, which is what we know is about 70% of the migrants who arrive in Denver are not trying to get to Denver. They're trying to get to an ongoing destination because they have family in Chicago or Boston or Detroit or LA, and they either got placed on or accidentally dropped into a bus to Denver, and we spend 3, 5, 7 days housing them, supporting them, and still trying to help them get on to a future destination. It's much more efficient for us to contact them in El Paso and say, before you get on a bus to Denver, if your goal is really to go to Chicago, let's get you on a bus to Chicago, because that's both better for them and much more efficient and affordable for us. So we will continue to work with those cities that are sending folks to us to make sure we're helping them get to their long-term destination and not just to Denver as a way station.
So the community meetings that you held, the listening sessions, I know you had one on migrants. We were there. Have you implemented any of that feedback from those meetings?
So in terms of our transition committee hearings, so we did have great transition committee feedback, and they gave us those reports. We've started working on them. We're right now in the process of hiring all of our cabinet leaders that will run these agencies. So over the next 5 to 6 weeks, we're working on bringing on, all the 25 cabinet heads that will help run the city. And so as part of those conversations, what we wanted these transition memos to do was to provide feedback to incoming applicants or current leadership to say, here are some key data points on feedback. How can we incorporate that into the long-term plan? 2 of the things that we did here overwhelmingly in that feedback was, how do we help get people access to work if they are able and willing? And how do we help make sure they have a final destination? And I think the big feedback was around the contracting around the Garter world, was to say, we think there are local community-based nonprofits that can provide these services. If you break up the RFP into smaller pieces. And so that was exactly what we did in this RFP, and that was directly based on that feedback from community organizations.
I think one of you put out it was a pamphlet from some of those meetings, and one of them on the migrant meeting that you guys had, the transition meeting. And in one of the feedback, it said that you guys were interested, or there was feedback or interest in perhaps creating a role like a migrant integration manager. Do you have any intention of doing that, or do you have any intention of creating like an office for this, or specific people dedicated to it?
Yes, we will have a role for an advisor on the migrant crisis in the mayor's office, and so that is one we will post, if it's not posted already, to begin to hire for that role. And that person is often an integrator. They're the person that connect all the existing departments. If you have the Department of Human Services that's helping do intake, if we have the Department of Transit and Infrastructure that's helping manage some of the facilities, if we have nonprofit partners that are doing additional work on providing wraparound services, that person helps build the coalition, bring in the partners, and deploy all those services together. So that will be a key job that we'll have in the mayor's office.
When was the last time you spoke yourself to migrants?
It has probably been since before the inauguration. I haven't in the last couple of weeks. I was at an intake site. We had a bus of folks that arrived at the City and County building last week, and I went over to see them, and they'd already been moved on to the Coliseum for intake. And so, generally, whenever if there's a bus that arrives, I'll try to walk over and say hello. But I haven't done that in the last couple of weeks. And in my conversations with folks in encampments, I've not yet come across a population of migrants that have arrived. We know they're out there. But whenever we have a new set of arrivals that come, I try to walk across the street or head over to the Coliseum and get feedback from them when they get here.
Back in the springtime, I think it was May, right before Title 42 expired, I'm sure you know about the garage that was serving as the intake center. What kind of position do you guys want to be in if you do see an increase in migrants, so that something like that doesn't happen again, and so that they can get access to services? I did visit the garage then when that was up and running on the Auraria campus and talked to migrants there, and I agree that was not an optimal location, but the city responded, and the intake has been at the Coliseum. We're now preparing to move it to the Department of Human Services building on the east side of the city that I think will be well positioned to do that kind of intake. It'll have a separate door and separate processing from other city services, so there's a distinction between what services people will need. But I think that facility, we believe, is well positioned to manage this volume, and also has all of our city employees there and ready to receive them, so we're not trying to set up makeshift card tables in a Coliseum or at a parking lot. And so I think this is a more stable long-term plan to integrate those individuals to the services we have. I know throughout the year, different employees with the city have been doing this work outside of their regular job roles. Do you have any idea how many people are still working on this outside of their regular job roles in the city? Yeah, so the Department of Human Services has done an incredible job being able to bring their employees in to take on these tasks. We have many folks who have had two jobs for months. They've been both trying to keep their old responsibilities together and also being called into duty on the front lines here. And so we're, first of all, incredibly grateful to the city employees who've done that. I think we're trying to now stabilize that. We brought on some on-call workers at the Department of Human Services who help do this as their now full-time job. And so we don't have to have people doing two jobs at the same time. So that's still being carried by Department of Human Services. Our goal as we put out these RFPs, that work will transition to outside community providers. We'll help provide the locations and the sites, but really all the direct services will contract to community partners. I know that you've said that a lot of the migrants that you've spoken to, they never really intended to be here in Denver, but many of them do end up staying. Do you guys have any kind of estimate on the number of migrants who have decided to stay in the city and are living here now? We don't have good data on that because, as you know, it's hard to track individuals once they get out into the city, and we don't have any direct way to provide services because they're not directly connected to the city. And so we've anecdotally helped on placement data. Did you get placed into housing? Did you get placed into some other set of services? But we're trying to get a better sense of where those folks have ended up. And so again, we know we've had 15,000 who have come through. We have about 700 that are still in shelters. We have more than 6,000 who we know we've transported off to other locations. But the others, we're trying to get better data on where they are and where they have arrived. But we seem to be that they have either integrated successfully into families or other community partners because we've not seen a huge spike in public service demands from that population after they leave housing. Do you like the sheltering system as it is right now? Do you think the time allowed for migrants in a shelter should be extended, shortened? And, do you see yourself adding shelters, taking more away?
Yeah. It's one of the things we're going to be tracking closely is, do we believe the 30-day timeline is the right one? Is it too short? Is it too long? Is it just right? We do want to help people get access to services long term, and we know that we can't house people forever. We have lots of folks in the city who have challenges with housing access, both people that are unhoused, both teachers and nurses and firefighters every day who are finding it hard to pay the bills here. So we have a whole set of community members who are struggling with that same need around housing. But we do want to make sure that we're thoughtful, and we don't want to be increasing our population of people that are unhoused, nor do we want to be putting people at risk. And so we'll continue to monitor that. Right now we've had pretty good success of transitioning people on at that timeline, but we'll always keep an eye on it and open to changing practice if we need to.
I know we're coming short on time. Chris, is there anything that you...
I guess how do you differentiate those migrants living in tents versus someone else on the street? And I guess just on the position with the nonprofits that are running out of funding, that are placing migrants, paying the deposit, helping with the deposit, helping with the first month's rent. So you have someone that's timed out of the shelter, not able to work, and if they don't have money to get into housing right away, or if nonprofits placing them don't have the money. I guess how do you differentiate those living in tents?
Yeah. I think this is for us a real example of why the American immigration system is broken, is we have a humanitarian belief that if you're coming from a war-torn country or a country where you're being persecuted, you should be able to seek asylum. And yet if it takes you 2 years to get a decision on that asylum, you are in the country without the ability to work in the meantime. And we know it is very hard to support you or your family if you can't work. And so this is where we hit the crux of broken federal policy we want to try to help solve. And in the meantime, we're trying to duct tape it together as well as we can to say, how can we connect you to services, help you get access to housing, and have to figure out how you're going to try to find a way to make a living. There are people going for day jobs or looking for any employment they can find, we're sure. But I think what we are focused on right now is how do we make sure we can get them stably integrated, get them access to services they need, connect them to nonprofit partners who have connections in the community, partner with them around services. And right now we do know they have a very different set of needs than our unhoused population. And so right now the biggest challenge that our migrant population faces is they are living in a city where they want to work, but the federal law prohibits them from working, and they're trying to manage that challenge. And so we're trying to figure out everything we can do to help bridge that divide. But knowing that we have 12 million Americans who've been stuck in this situation for a long time, many of them raising families and working every day in the city. And so we want to make sure we can help find a long-term solution for what we know is a very urgent short-term crisis.
And the second half of that question for migrants who, we know that 30-day shelters exist as well as 21-day shelters, but when it comes to migrants who phase out of those shelters, time has expired, they have no money, they've gotten very little work or no work at all since they've been here, what option do you think the city should, if any, offer to them in that in-between? Because right now they are, just living on their own in cars, tents, encampments.
What we're working on doing is helping partner with community providers to get them access to housing, as you mentioned, see if we can pay a first month rent, get you into a unit, get you stabilized. And so all the wraparound services will be navigators who help them identify either places where they can find housing or services or opportunities that are available. But we are stuck in a scenario. We both want to be, we want to do the humanitarian thing and support people in getting access to services. And we also know in the absence of the ability to work, it'll be hard for us to support them permanently on those services. And so we're doing everything we can to transition people, but the reality is people are going to have to look for work on their own without state support or federal government approval if we want them to support themselves. So our choices are either help them find a way to support themselves or have the state or the city commit to supporting them permanently on our own. We don't have the city budget to do that permanently, and so we would either need the federal government to say, we won't let these people work, but we will provide funding to support them in the 2 years that they're waiting, or we will let them work. But I don't think there's a viable solution to say you can't work and we don't have the money for you to support them while they don't work. I don't think that's a reasonable solution, and that's where we're stuck right now, which is why we're trying to both connect them to as many services as possible and create a path and be able to get to work while they get their asylum case resolved.
Mayor Johnston, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.